Is that at your house, Stuart?
No, I don't think it is. No.
It's pretty funny.
Did you hear that federal parliament vote that they held online? And there was one person voted against the bill. Don't know what bill it was. And you could hear somebody say in the background, "Oh no!" A member of the family, I guess. Things you learn, eh? About how to do this.
Frank's right up there with standing up and realizing you're not wearing any pants, but a nice shirt and tie.
Hey, everybody, I think we're ready to go now.
All right, let's go.
You're good to go.
Thank you. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 6:32 Pacific time and acknowledge that Colwood's on the shared traditional lands of the Coast Salish people. I think the first thing I have to do is to get a acknowledgement that everybody's here. Councillor Day,
I'm here.
Councillor Baxter,
I am here.
Councillor Kobayashi,
Here.
Councillor Jansen,
Present.
Councillor Logan,
Present.
Mayor Martin.
I'm here.
Good, and we're ready and raring to go then. Next, approval of the agenda. I think if everybody's online, we'll take one motion to approve the near term, long term, and tonight's committee of the whole agenda. Can I get a mover of that, please? I have moved by Councillor Jansen, seconded by Councillor Kobayashi. I'm going to lower all the hands. Any discussion? Seeing none, any in opposition? Seeing none, declare that passed. Next, I'm looking for a motion to adopt the minutes of the Committee of the Whole, September 8th. Moved by Councillor Kobayashi, seconded by Councillor Logan, which I may not need seconders for, I guess, eh? Any discussion? Seeing none, any in opposition? Seeing none, I'll say those are passed. Public participation, last I heard at about 15 minutes ago, there was nobody registered to, no input and no registration. Is that still the case, Amanda?
Yes, that's still the case.
Okay, then moving on to item 5.1, fleet management policy, public works and general staff vehicles. I can tell members of council that the author of this report, John Russell, is in the building, is in with Mr. Earl, so he's ready and willing to answer questions. He'll appear as Mr. Earl, but sound as Mr. Russell. So, anybody want to start this off? Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's a good report, but I think there's one fundamental question that has to be asked. You have the criteria for purchasing, and the great criteria A to L on page 3 of 3 of the, or 25 of 41 of the handout. But the first question that, and it goes back to a point that I made way back when we were discussing this before, I noticed that there's some vehicles in our fleet that have minimal mileage on it. If I remember right, I don't have a great memory anymore, but so I guess the first question that has to be asked, before all these other criteria are applied, is the question of, is it required? I think that's a really important question because, isn't it more cost effective in the case of where we had those very, very low mileage vehicles to just rent them as required? Or, if we're only using, say, a truck for once a month, is it not more cost effective just to rent it or contract it out. So that's my question for staff.
Okay,
Thank you very much, Councilor Kobayashi, and I really appreciate that question, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. So in response to that, we've tried to build some flexibility into the policy so that we don't have rigidity in that kind of a situation. We want to make it so that each year management can sit down and decide which vehicles need to be replaced, which ones are being used effectively, and which ones we can extend the life of. And so we hope to be able to work around situations like that. In terms of rental or leasing, that will be part of the purchasing process. We're going to put out requests for quotations for various vehicles, and that will be handled in terms of the competition of the private sector. If it's cheaper to lease a vehicle and that fits with our standards, that will likely be the case. So at the moment, this is trying to be kind of a broad overview. And then from there, it'll be a case-by-case basis in line with the purchasing program. But we hope to have some flexibility there.
Okay, fair enough. I understand what you're saying, but I guess my issue here, I hate to be a pain here, but if we say go ahead and we approve this tonight, that's a license to do, not to do what you just said to do. That you know, we're just going to do it according to the plan here. So I guess that's my only concern.
okay, thank you, Councilor Kobayashi. We don't actually have a motion on the floor, but perhaps you might want to make an amendment to it when we get there to include that. I see CAO Earl, which may be Mr. Russell wishing to chime in here, so I'm going to let them go, and then I have Councilor Baxter and Councilor Jansen still to speak. Mr. Earl?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Just referencing back to page 2 of 3 of the report, the responsibility section, the first paragraph in that section. What we're trying to say here is that notwithstanding the programmatic replacement of vehicles on one of the 2 cycles that we're recommending tonight, that said, each time a vehicle comes up for replacement, individual decisions will be made. And if we happen to be in the situation where we have a vehicle with very low mileage, very low usage, which has substantial life left, we will weigh the risks of keeping that vehicle against the risks of a major repair to one of the systems, one of the mechanical systems. And again, in the instance where a vehicle has very low hours or very low kilometers, it's very likely that a particular decision will be made to extend that vehicle's useful life beyond the plan. What the plan is intended to do is ensure that we set aside the right amount of money to replace vehicles when we need them. It does not govern the specifics of each purchasing choice, however.
Okay. Councilor Baxter?
Yeah, I'd like to say that I really enjoyed reading this report and the policy. Everything's very clear and easy to understand, and I think other than the point Doug just made, we seem to have got it dead right. I would just like to say in support of what Doug was asking, that although staff have assured us that the right thing will be done, and I absolutely believe that, if it's not in the policy and the policy survives past those staff's time with us, then that very sensible review is not passed on to the next person who may not wish to do it or not think of it. So I would much prefer that everything that Mr. Earl said would be captured in the policy somewhere. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the lettered areas of the procedure, but somewhere in responsibilities, for instance. And I don't think it is actually captured there right now, although I've just read it again quickly. I might have missed it. But yeah, I would support an amendment along those lines. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Jansen?
Thank you, Your Acting Worship. I too read this. It made sense to me, which is great. And I'd just like to point out to my appears that option 2 specifically basically seeks approval of the recommended option plus any additional comments by council. So I think it fits nicely into what we're talking about here. And I'm happy to make a motion here. And I think that it's covered nicely in the responsibilities section of the policy. And I think that we can word it something along the lines of option 2 and add a line about being consistent with the responsibilities of department managers and fleet supervisors as specified in the City of Colwood policy. So I would go ahead and make that motion.
Okay, so motion to the effect of option 2 in the report, plus being consistent with the requirements of the policy manual of Colwood. Is that more or less what you said there?
Yes, I'm happy to have it wordsmithed by Marcy or Amanda or any additional comments by the CAO. And I do have a couple of thoughts once you're ready, Mr. Parkinson.
All right, I have a number of people wishing to speak. We now have a motion on the floor, but I think I can assume everybody's speaking to the motion, and we'll just carry on with the list, get the motion read back at the end, and have a vote at that point. Mayor Martin?
Thank you, Chair. I have several questions. The first to staff, so through the chair. I struggled with understanding the difference between option 1 and option 2 from a cost standpoint. And so I would be interested in understanding what are the actual financial ramifications of choosing option 1 versus option 2. I'm going to throw all my questions out and I'll let because I think they're all relevant to each other. So that way staff can just answer them all at the same time. I'm also interested in understanding what our GHG policy is and how we're measuring that. And I'd like to understand what the metric we're using between gas, diesel, and electric to measure what our cost per mile or cost per hour is. And I'm wondering if staff have done any of that.
Okay. I'm going to turn that then to Mr. Earl or Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. Now, with regard to the first part of the question to do with the cost ramifications of each plan. So option B, because there will be more vehicles, for example, purchased in the next 7 years because the timelines are shorter, it will require an annual cost of $409,907 to facilitate. Option C, because it pushes those times out further, reduces the yearly cost to operate to $321,365. And so by lengthening those timelines, we're reducing our yearly cost in that way. Now, in terms of looking at the GHG emissions in detail, that is something we can definitely look at. It has not been put together for this particular report, but I do know that our long-range planning department does some metrics in that regard with regards to reporting to the province. So we can do more research on that. But in terms of minimizing the GHG, we're looking just in terms of general usage for the vehicles, just industry standards that we can find.
So, okay, I guess my question becomes, which, sorry, and you threw me off, sorry, through the chair, my apologies, Chair. Through the chair, you threw me off when you said option C. I don't know what option C is. I'm sorry.
I would say appendix C.
Or maybe I'm looking at appendix A. I apologize. I was looking at appendix A.
Appendix B and C give the costing figures.
Right. Okay. Got it. So, so we don't know then between option 1, 2, what our operating costs would be if we made a choice around option 1 versus option 2 in regards to cost per hour or cost per mile or kilometer. Am I correct in saying that?
Your worship, if I may.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Earl.
This particular report is just looking at the capital costs of replacement of our fleet. It is not specifically looking at the operating costs, and those operating costs would include fuel costs, and they also could include GHG impact or GHG intensity per use. And so again, staff would take all of that into account during a purchase decision, but this particular report this evening is only looking at the capital costs with respect to fleet replacement.
Right. And so again, through the chair, I guess that's where I struggle, because I would be making a capital purchase decision based on what our long-term operational costs would be on those vehicles. So it becomes difficult for me to make a capital decision when I don't know what the operating decisions are. And I use as an example loss leaders by selling printers. You sell a printer at $40 and then they charge you $120 to get a cartridge replacement. And so I struggle with that. And so to be honest, I don't know how I would actually support this at council, whatever these decisions would be. In addition, I'm also interested in understanding how COVID has affected our long-term purchasing plan. And has it accelerated it? Has it decelerated it? What are we doing in regards to staff not being able to be in the same vehicle?
Want to take that one, Mr. Earl? Russell?
Thank you, Mayor Martin. In regards to the staff not being in the same vehicle, we have had to switch to a model whereby we have one staff member in a vehicle, which has increased costs in terms of fuel. We've had to rent 3 vehicles to facilitate that. So for the time being, we're continuing status quo with that. But depending on the length of COVID and as things progress, we may seek council's approval to change that plan temporarily if we need to lease another vehicle, for example, or we need to replace that with a purchase vehicle to save costs. These are something that we evaluate regularly. At the moment, due to the COVID timeline, we foresee rental taking care of this. But if that changes, we will definitely report back to council.
Thank you, Chair. I'm done.
You done? Okay, thank you. Councillor Day?
Thank you. In reading the report, I thought it was a very well done report in terms of looking at the capital costs, and certainly thorough in terms of, you know, what we have and what we are proposing for the future. But I agree with the mayor that it would be better if we had were informed by our operating costs, because, you know, of course, we want to provide our services at the lowest cost for the taxpayer and in the safest way. With COVID and every other issue, we want them to help our staff appropriately. But we also want to keep our long-term costs as low as possible. And I do think that when I'm purchasing a vehicle, and certainly when we think about hybrid or electric, it is the cost of operation that's driving a good portion of that decision. So I think that option 3 would be a better option, that now that we've had a look at the report, and I think it is very well done, but we need that little bit, another layer of information in terms of what the operating costs are. And I also think that what Councillor Baxter spoke to earlier is also really important, which is the history of how we've arrived where we are today. And not because we need to give accolades for past or anything, but simply because there were reasons for making decisions, and council provides input and staff get, you know, an idea of where we're coming from, putting all of our heads together, and then councils change, staff retire, and that information gets lost. And every organization I've been involved with has great difficulty hanging on to that historical part of the information. It's such a loss when you have a long-term employee retire that I think it's really helpful if we can find a way to kind of capture and carry the pertinent information forward, so that it doesn't get lost when there is staff turnover. So that's what I would like to see. I would like to see, we've had a look at it, they've heard some of our thoughts, for staff to come back and kind of flesh out the picture a little bit.
Thank you, Councillor Day. Okay, so we do have a motion on the floor. If I may, I'm going to ask Amanda to read it back to us.
Okay, well, I'll try. So what I think it is that option 1 of the fleet management option 2 of the fleet management policy be recommended to council, and that staff evaluate any assets coming due for replacement as per the policy and determine any new acquisitions required.
That work for you, Councillor Jansen?
Sounds pretty good. It's, Amanda, consistent with the responsibilities section in the policy.
Yes, I was reading it directly from the policy.
Okay, gotcha. And I had a couple of points or questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I'm going to let everybody go around once more and then we'll have a vote. Go ahead.
So is
Mr.
that-
Jansen.
Okay, I gotcha. A couple of questions for Mr. Russell. Any thought given to, and I'll just rattle through them here. Any thought given to joint purchasing arrangement with other municipalities is one. And is there flexibility in this? I'm getting the sense there's flexibility, but maybe you can confirm, for instance, if we don't need 2 or 3 Chevy pickup crew cabs this year, but we do need, you know, a bigger piece of equipment, that we can sort of reassign those funds. It doesn't inhibit that in any way, I'm assuming. Thank you.
In terms of the joint purchasing, that is something that we would definitely explore with our purchaser to see if that works through her network. At the moment, we haven't considered it in the report because the basic function will be to follow the purchasing policy. And then from there, whatever form that takes in terms of the most efficient acquisition for the city. Now, with regard to the flexibility of replacement, generally, in order to make sure that the fleet stays essentially the same as what council approved, built into this policy is that new acquisitions should fall in line with the piece of equipment it's replacing. So it wouldn't necessarily be up to staff to take 3 pickup trucks and morph them into one expensive piece of equipment. In order to facilitate that, we would want to come to council and ask for your permission.
Thank you. Is that enough, Mr. Jansen? Councillor? Yes, oh, you're nodding. Sorry, I got hands in front of your face. Councillor Baxter.
Yeah, I have one question, and then I'm going to suggest 2 separate amendments. So my question is that the Appendix A and Appendix B compare capital cost, but they don't include operating cost. So by running equipment longer, certainly some equipment anyway, not all of it necessarily, we will in fact possibly increase operating costs due to lower efficiency or greater likelihood of repairs. Is that not so? That's a question to staff.
And this is something that we can look at more closely and prepare. If this is brought to council at a later date, we can shed more light on that. Generally speaking, in the 7 to 10 year mark for a typical pickup truck, we haven't seen a significant increase in cost. The most typical one is to replace tires, that sort of thing. So generally what we're seeing is not a large increase there.
Right, thank you. I wouldn't expect so either. So First Amendment is to add into the procedures section a requirement that the candidates for purchase be compared on a life cycle cost basis. And that could either be as a separate lettered item or included in one of the other items. But I think we need a mention of life cycle cost comparison.
Okay, I'll take that as an amendment. Then I'm going to lower hands. I still have Councillor Day wishing to speak on the main motion. Anybody wish to speak on this amendment from Councillor Baxter? I don't think I see any. So all opposed to that amendment, please say so. Seeing none, that amendment passes. You had a second one, Councillor Baxter?
Yes, that we add under responsibilities a sentence to the effect that the mileage and hours of the equipment being replaced will be considered, and as to whether this indicates a lack of need to replace or the possibility of rental instead. That's the amendment.
So I'll accept that amendment on the condition that nobody ever accuses me of getting too far into the weeds again. Any discussion on that amendment? Seeing none, any in opposition? Seeing none, that amendment passes. Now going back to the main motion as amended, Councillor Day, I have you wishing to speak.
Thank you. Now, after all that, I have to think hard. Okay, I just wanted to know if we approve this policy and it is passed at council, will this policy direct staff to make those purchases, or will it direct them in the way that they bring it forward to council? In other words, I'm asking, does this policy inform a report that comes to council, or does this policy inform staff and they just go and do it?
Mr. Earl?
Thank you, Chair. This policy, should it move forward to council and should it be passed, would inform what's included in the budget for the coming year or years. Each of these would form a budget expenditure, and until that budget is passed, we do not have the authority to proceed.
So there wouldn't actually be a report coming to council outside of budget saying, we've now decided that we're going to replace X, Y, and Z vehicles and per the policy, and we'd like your approval. It's going to be, here's our policy and here's our plan. And then if we wanted it to be different, we would have to make a motion to change something.
Mr. Earl, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chair. So this policy would govern what we put in the budget for the coming year in terms of vehicle replacement, and that budget line item, as with all other budget line items, would be debated in chambers with council. Through that process, we would fundamentally create a list of vehicles that are up for planned replacement. That said, each would kind of go through the very specific process, and until we went to market and better understood what the options were, the actual decision would not be made. And through that process, we would isolate, well, here are the vehicles that are up for planned replacement. Here is potentially a vehicle that did not last its useful life that we'd like to accelerate the replacement on. Here's a few vehicles that we'd like to decelerate the replacement on given their hours and or condition. Or here's an additional vehicle that wasn't on the list that we would like to lift up for your consideration. And so again, This policy would govern what forms part of the budget process. Ultimately, council, through approval of the budget, has the final say.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have no hands in the air, so I'm going to call for a vote on the motion as amended. All those in opposition, please signify by raising your hands. I have Councillor Day in opposition. That motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Russell, for that report and your work to date. Moving on then to item 5.2, Alan Thomas, payment in lieu of taxes, regional benchmarking. I suppose I should give you a chance to introduce this, Alan, if you'd like to, or we can dive right into it.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick introduction. This report is provided for information only, and the key things I'm delivering here is an update to committee on our annual income generated from PILT, how our PILT revenue compares across the CRD in terms of our proportion of revenue, and finally, to determine if committee requires any further action from staff on the PILT process or the PILT revenue process. That's basically what it is, and please advise if any questions or discussions on the report, please.
Thank you. I see Councillor Day wishing to speak.
Thank you. Appreciate the report and also how difficult it is to kind of capture what happens with payment in lieu of taxation. There is considerable history on our PILT in that we've had to appeal a number of reductions in our payment in lieu of taxes over the years, and those appeals have been very labor intensive for our finance department, taking many hours and lots of legal assistance to get through them. And what I noticed when I was reading this report is that it kind of is a little bit simplistic look at PILT. Certainly those of us with a significant portion of land that is subject to PILT, we can really be upside down when there's a sudden change to that. And that there's nothing here that kind of indicates how volatile these portfolios can be. So I really think that we need some of the historical data on the PILT so that we can be prepared for the risks that are associated with it. Because, you know, the fact that we receive federal PILT demonstrates that, you know, those lands are not just parkland. They may in fact develop into something else in the future, and the PILT represents that. It also doesn't give us any information about the services that are used by the lands. And by that, I mean, many of the lands that are subject to PILT in Colwood require service from the fire department. They require service from our roads. They also use sewer, and that can cost a considerable amount to service the lands. And we don't have any idea from this report whether the PILT that we're receiving is covering the costs of the services that we're providing.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Thomas.
No, I just want to thank you, Councillor Day, for the feedback. Correct. This was a top-level overview from a revenue perspective. Risks were open for discussion tonight, but not specifically laid out. Hence, I'd be glad to take further action on the report as needed. And as far as the services, yes, I think one of the impetuses for bringing this forward was to understand what our revenue is, given there is services associated with that. We don't necessarily at this stage have a costing for services per property. It would be a more in-depth analysis required. Should you wish to see that, and I'm open to that suggestion or discussion as needed.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through the chair to Alan, just have a few questions, Alan. So I think Councillor Day made the same point I was about to make. I believe, like, for example, Royal Roads sits on D&D land right now as it is. They lease it on a 99-year lease, and so D&D, I would assume the federal government is paying a PILT, and is the universe, I believe the university is through the advanced education, they pay a portion, right, for fire services and sewage and all that stuff. I think I'm not sure. This is my question. So that's question number one. The second question I have is Ocean Boulevard itself. This has really got me going here after I reviewed this list here. Like, who actually owns that? Because Ocean Boulevard, there's only one way to get into the military housing right now, and that's Ocean Boulevard. And then it also goes to the Military Family Center. And then we have the big federal park right there, Fort Rod Hill. So do we, I guess it's just a straight question, yes or no, but who actually owns that and who's responsible for that road? It just brought up a question in my head. So that's question number two. Question number three is, I'd love to see in this spreadsheet is, I'm not too sure, like, you've got these places identified, but I'm not too sure where they all are. I know where some of them are. It's pretty self-explanatory, but there's some areas along, again, Ocean Boulevard, all these vacant land plots. And I found that really interesting. And I thought to myself, I wonder where those are. So is it possible to get sort of a map showing where all these pieces of land are? And lastly, I guess it's more of a comment, but this is when we were something that I never thought of, and this just came up, it hit me like a ton of bricks. But the tax classes, that was really interesting because I forgot about this. There's each piece of land here has, it's either class 1, class 8, or class 9. And, when we were making decisions to, look at reducing, business taxes and things like this is going to affect our PILT, is it not? It's just something that I didn't think of. And it looks like it's going to affect it, but maybe you can clarify that, Alan. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I hope I get them in order, and I hope I wrote them down properly. As far as, yes, Royal Roads, outside of this, the actual Provincial Educational Institute, we receive approximately 16,000 from the province for the exactly what you and Councillor Day had suggested for the university itself, the institution, on top of this list, which is for the federal owned property. So an extra 16,000. As far as the maps and the ownership of Ocean Boulevard, yes, I'd be glad to update my spreadsheet with a little descriptor and possibly and some type of map for you. I can provide that as a follow-up document if that works for you, Councillor.
That would be great, Alan.
Yeah, and as I said, a little bit of descriptor on each one, which might help clarify location. And finally, yes, the tax rate impact. Yes, when we met in April, and my next item is actually a follow-up to our tax rate review document. We met in April. At the time, we had done assessments to say, let's hold off on our recreational NPO tax rate adjustments because we want to do a proper analysis of PILT and the impact that it will have. We did not have the business class information at the time. I had a quick discussion last week during agenda review to say, yes, there is an impact from the reduction in the business class as well on our future PILT revenue. The actual impact of that is, and I was going to get into it in the tax policy document, but I'd be glad to talk to it here, is about $36,000 for 2021 for the business side. The recreation side is about 32,000, so a total of about 68,000 as we move to reduce our tax rates for those two categories. Again, you know, and we could have a discussion on that right now. Again, jumping in slightly into the next item, the philosophy around that from the light industrial, from the business, and from the rec MPO was to drive investment in Colwood in terms of Allendale lands, in terms of the museum, in terms of other areas. So this is a unintended implication of that, but I still believe the approach we've taken financially will offset, not I believe, it will offset the $68,000 per year reduction in PILT due to our tax rate adjustments.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Maybe we could, if it's all right with the rest of council, we could leave discussions on the tax rates and stuff to the next item on the agenda. Yeah, and then, yeah, and I'll leave it till then if I may. Anything else, Councillor Kobayashi?
No, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Jansen.
I was going to say, I don't think there's a motion as of yet, so I'll make that motion. I think it's just to receive.
Thank you. Anybody wish to speak on that motion? I see two hands. Councillor Jansen, your hand's up again. Go ahead. Or did I just not lower it properly? Okay, Councillor Day.
Leftover.
Okay, my mistake. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I would like to suggest that we should have option 2, which is receiving this report and recommend further action on the PILT process. I really do think that this is a good start, but we need some more information. We could put together the map so everyone knows where we're talking about. We could get more information on where each of these parcels is, and then find out a little bit more about how the properties that are subject to PILT are paying for sewer, water, fire service, etc.
Thank you, Councillor Day. Would you consider that a friendly amendment, Mr. Councillor Jansen?
Yeah, that sounded fine to me. Thank you.
Okay. Then I'm still looking if anybody has any discussion on the main motion as friendly amended. Seeing none, any in opposition to that motion?
Well, point of order, Mr. Chairman, don't we have to vote on the amendment first?
It was a friendly amendment. I don't think we do. Is my understanding, but Mr. Earl wants to jump in here, so we'll let him correct me if I'm wrong. Go ahead, Mr. Earl.
Thank you, Chair Parkinson. Some of those items that were mentioned in the list of report improvements will take substantive staff time. And so I'm just at this juncture wanting to know at what frequency council would like to see this information return.
Why don't you give us a hint of when you think we're going to get it, and we can decide if we're okay with that.
Thank you, Chair. The finance team, as council is aware, is very busy getting ready for service review followed by budget. The type of information, the type of analysis recommended on this PILT item would take several months and we would need to kind of put tools down on those other projects to pick tools up on this project. And so if council is desirous of the information recommended in the friendly amendment, I would suggest a deep 2021 would be a time when we could get through service review, get through the budget process, and then put our minds to this.
I'm assuming that not all of it would take that long, so perhaps we could modify this a little bit. You know, I think there were 3 parts to Councillor Day's amendment. Maybe 1 or 2 of them could be done in promptly, and we may have to wait a while. I can see the servicing cost being a time-consuming process. Would I be correct in that assumption?
Absolutely. You know, the map and some of the history would be quite simple. Understanding the costs that these individual properties have on our systems is substantively more complex.
Thank you for that. I see Councillor Day and Councillor Baxter have their hands to discuss this. Councillor Day?
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that I think that most of this information is already in hand with finance. I don't expect it would have changed in the last couple of years. And we certainly have looked at it in depth before. I know that we used to call them the super users for sewer, which was Royal Roads University, West Shore Parks and Rec. And it escapes my mind right now, but there's one more. So those are the public institutions that are using the sewer system, and because they're non-taxable entities, we have to recover the cost a different way.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter?
Okay, I'm a little bit confused as to what we're talking about here.
So okay, just so I think we're on the same page. My understanding is we have the motion to receive the report and ask for the maps to show which properties are being referred to, any other PILT information or guilt, I think, from the provincial government, any other things. And I think the third item, which seems to be the time-consuming one, is, and what services do we provide for these tax dollars?
Yeah, that's I'm not clear on what information we would get on that third one. So for instance, fire was mentioned. Nobody pays for fire separately. Fire is part of taxation. And my understanding is that as far as the payers of the PILT are concerned, when they pay that number, they're paying for everything included in taxes. And is anybody going to disagree with that on staff?
I see Mr. Earl has his hand up. Maybe we'll give him another chance to chime in. Mr. Earl?
Thank you, Chair. No, that's absolutely correct. On the items that are paid for with tax, we assume that PILT payers are receiving the same services that taxpayers are paying for those services. In wastewater, for example, as was mentioned, that is recovered with fees and not taxes. And certainly the wastewater information relative to these properties would be much simpler to gather and report back. I thought I had heard that council might have been seeking specific information about the costs of providing fire service to this property, or the costs of providing road services to this property, or other such costs. And so if it's just how we are distributing the broad costs against these properties, that's relatively straightforward information. If we're seeking to understand the specific costs of these properties, that's where it becomes more complex, where we don't have a water meter, for example, to understand the quantities involved.
And I would say, through the chair, that from my experience of watching PILT being discussed and fought over, that no matter what we find these costs to be, that will not be a sufficient argument to get more PILT for that reason. Would staff agree with that?
Thank you, through the chair. Staff would not disagree with that comment.
Thank you. So reluctantly, I find myself opposed to this motion simply because of that third part. It feels like it's a waste of staff's time to me.
Okay, I have Councillor Logan wishing to speak, and then if somebody wanted to make an amendment to split off to hive off the third part, I'd be accepting of that. Mr. Logan, Councillor
Thank
Logan.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm actually glad that Councillor Baxter raised those points because I wholeheartedly agree. I'm struggling to understand how the information that staff will provide will guide us in any of our decision making. And it seems to me that it's more out of interest more than anything. And I appreciate that. I'd be interested to know some of the information, but I agree. It's not to my mind, a priority. And I can't see where that any report would influence a decision or influence, as Councillor Baxter had mentioned, any additional PILT coming to the municipality. So given the staff resources that are required, I won't be supporting the motion, but I appreciate the questions.
Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much. Just a clarification, Councillor Logan. I agree. Mine's just not for the purpose of the PILT here. I mean, it was a bit of a surprise to see how much land, that they're paying, that we're getting PILT for down on Ocean Boulevard. And I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that, we as a city have been going it alone as far as the maintenance of that road and looking at potential mitigation things that we can do to preserve the road a lot longer with the rising sea levels. And I guess my point that I'm trying to make is that depending on where all this land is, and the very fact there's people are fighting because there's a bird sanctuary there, and the First Nations have ancient burial grounds there. I don't understand why this is totally our responsibility. I don't understand why we can't make the case for federal dollars to help us maintain this. That's where I'm trying to get with this right now. So that's the only reason. And I know it's not a big deal because I was told that we can identify these areas really quickly. But I just like to know because it helps. So that's the purpose of why I wanted to know. It just makes me smarter. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kobayashi. I have Councillor Day and then Councillor Baxter. And I have to confess, I would really like to see an amendment to this motion that supported the first two steps and perhaps ask staff for a report on what would be involved in the third step. But of course, I'm just the chair. I'll leave that to wiser heads. Councillor
Well,
Day.
that was my purpose in putting my hand up, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, well, let's let Councillor Day go first, please, Mr. Baxter.
Likewise, I can see that it seems to be a stumbling block, so I'm happy to wait for the information. I would like to know on the sewer question, which I think is the easier part to answer. I would just like to know how the super users are currently paying for the sewer, so that those properties that are within the PILT areas which are using that service, it's a big hit to all the taxpayers. I'm not suggesting otherwise. I just want to know so that I can answer when I'm asked, are they paying their fair share? And we can say yes.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter.
I wish to move to sever the third part of the friendly amendment from the original or from the rest of the motion and amendment so that we can vote on the two separately. I'd just like to suggest to Councillor Day that if she needs that information, simply on the sewers, I'm sure that staff would provide that at some point, and that it doesn't need to be part of a motion. Thank you.
So on the amendment, anybody wish to discuss the amendment? Seeing none, Anybody in opposition to the amendment? Okay, seeing none, the amendment passes. The motion as amended. Anybody wish to discuss that? Anybody in opposition to the motion as amended? Oops, Mayor Martin, were you discussing or voting on opposition?
Thank you. No, I just needed, I needed the amendment read one more time. I'm sorry, I'm confused with the amendment. What, or if we could just, if you could just tell me what the third thing was that we severed off, it's fine. I'm just confused on what the
Yeah, oh,
point.
sorry, okay. So the amendment, the first thing was some mapping to show where it was, some indication on what provincial, I think they're called gilts for the province as opposed to pilts. Those were the first two that remain. The third item that has been hived off was that staff do a report on the costs of all services to lands serviced under this. Got it? Once again, any in opposition to this motion as amended? Seeing none, I declare that passed. Michael, did you want to make a motion on the third part, or anyone make a motion on the third part? I'll give you a chance quickly.
Not me.
I have Councillor Day.
Thank you. I'd just like to move that staff also provide information on how the PILT properties contribute to sewer.
Okay, any discussion on that motion? Mayor Martin.
Thank you. Just to help staff, I do recall that this was already dealt with at Belmont Park, because part of the way the sewers are determined is based on water usage and how much water is being dropped into the sewer. And so that we have super users of West Shore Park and Rec, and then we also have super users of Belmont Park. And the federal government ignored what we said, and they paid us what they chose to pay us. So it becomes a little difficult. I mean, we can look into it, but again, this is completely up to the federal government to make that decision and not us. So we can say whatever we want. And if they, and I'm not sure how that helps us if we know that they're paying 62% of what we requested, are they paying their fair share or not? The federal government would suggest they are. So I'm not sure what our messaging would be behind that.
But it's all information. Any other discussion on this motion? Seeing none, those in opposition to the motion? I have Councillor Baxter, Logan, Kobayashi, and Martin in opposition to the motion. The motion fails. Councillor Jansen was a late opposing. The motion fails. All right. Okay, we're going to move on then to item 5.3, again from Mr. Thomas, the Chief Financial Officer on tax policy. Mr. Thomas, would you like to introduce this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this document's, as I slightly alluded to earlier, follow up from our April 23rd tax rate review discussion. And what it does is it solidifies our tax policy in terms of tax rate targets, as well as financial approaches in terms of debt management, user fees, sustainable infrastructure replacement, and permissive tax exemptions. And finally, it confirms our new approach from our service planning and 5-year financial plan process, which will be an annual embedded process in the fall each year. The key takeaway from this, I believe, is guidance for our 3 non-residential rates, which was discussed back in April, specifically our business rate to target a 3.67 multiple of our residential rate, light industrial to target the CRD average, which was already enacted in April, and the rec NPO to target the CRD average. The difference I've put in the policy is I've put a caveat that says plus or minus 10% of those target rates. And what this will allow us to do is look annually at the impact of any rates, including changes in assessments or whatnot, where we feel we do need to tweak these rates, but keep within the range of this policy. I'm open to questions now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion? Am I doing something wrong here? I don't see any hands in the air.
Must have been a great synopsis.
Ah,
You nailed it, Alan. You nailed it. Okay, I guilted Councillor Logan and Baxter to put their hands up. Councillor Logan,
I'll move the recommendation, Mr. Chair.
that committee received this tax policy report for information and consider recommending approval of the attached draft and finance policy to council. Okay, thank you. So moved. Councillor Baxter, you have a hand up?
Yeah, I think we need to remove the word consider from that motion. And just say, and recommend approval.
I see Councillor Logan nodding his head, so we'll consider that done. We'll consider there'll be no consider. Okay. Now I have no hands in the air. Anybody wish to discuss this? Seeing none, all those in opposition? Seeing none, I declare that passed. And I think the next meeting of the Committee of the Whole will be Monday, October 19th. Anything you want to say, Mr. Logan?
Yes, I move adjournment,
Attaboy.
Mr. Chair.
My
Hey,
hand
all.
was up before his.
Thank you for the recognition, Mr. Chair.
Okay, good night all.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.